Engineering, Magic, and Kitsune, Chapter 63, Infiltration. Moment by moment, John marched deeper into the heart of civilization. This was an awful idea. He didn't know what dangers lurked in Broadstream Town. Moment by moment, his heart beat faster as he fidgeted, struggling to keep his hands steady. He should turn back and figure something else out with Yuki. At the very least, he should have co-opted some of the militia to form an honor guard. Moment by moment, danger drew closer, wearing the shape of other people. John withdrew into himself, retreating into a shelter of his mind as he steeled his will. He'd done worse. This wasn't anything more dangerous than his regular trips into the woods before Yuki. The hazards just took a different form, that's all. Out in the forest, it was monsters or priests waiting for him to bumble into their field of view. Here, it was just people who may or may not blend in with the local population. Never mind that Kiku could probably shapeshift into a little old lady and grab him from behind when he wasn't looking. He just had to, not let anyone get behind him. Or get too close to him at all. Really, he just had to not interact with anyone, because even if they weren't Kiku, they could be one of her flunkies, and an Unbound presumably didn't have to look dangerous to be a threat. Breathe in, breathe out. His hand steadied, and his heart slowed. He had the tools to do this, even if he didn't have his new and improved gauntlet ready. From his pack, John drew a small crossbow he had attached a particular contraption to, something to even the playing field if it came down to it. Emptiness order sheaths were all the rage, after all, and although he could not counter supernatural strength entirely, he could certainly make them easier targets. While Kiku was damn smart and her allies were getting fed information, what better way to deal with the edge than to show up with a new bag of tricks every time? He just had to make sure that he was well and truly dealt with before his bag of tricks ran dry. As much as he hated to think it, there was no universe where it was enough just to drive Kiku off. No, there had needed some sort of lasting way to deal with her, be that imprisonment, stealing her away, or other means. Although the latter did not bode well for Yuki's mental health. What of the pink Kitsune sliminess which she inherited if her sister were slain? He had no idea how to fix that, or even if he should. Sure, he could maybe find a way to isolate her from the effects with enough research, but then all that power would likely go to her remaining sisters too, and there was no way in hell that he could figure out how to soul sieve or something to filter all that out. Would that not be dooming her to a death at the hands of her family? Focus. With renewed vigor, he resumed his slog into town, vigilant against any threats. Buildings grew in density as the farmland shrank, fields giving way to denser core as he tracked further into civilization. The roads turned from mud to stone, though it was still chocked with debris from the recent rainstorm. In places, he had to step around deep muddy puddles or over thick, heavy branches fallen from nearby trees. John had kept to the left of the path, deliberately exposing the arm holding a small crossbow to any potential attackers on the road. He wasn't over-wrestling anyone with supernatural strength, but hopefully they'd go for the obvious weapon first and let him retaliate with something far more devastating. Lightning had proven rather effective so far, after all. Most folk were still staying home, perhaps out of fear of the sky opening up once more, which is all fine by him. Glancing around to make sure nobody was sneaking up on him first, he checked his bearings once more. Following the trajectory of the way the first Ufuda was pointed, he briefly scanned the area with the Ufuda detector, jolting when it faintly clicked as he pointed it down a narrow side road. There. It was a weak positive, but it was a positive. Heading down the street, passing by a woman tending a small garden out in front of her house. She was petite, dark-haired, and wearing simple brown clothes, which were maybe a bit threadbare. As he started to pass, she looked up, and her eyes suddenly widened. Hurriedly, she rose and bowed. "Lord Hall," she said, before speeding off back inside. He let out breath that he didn't know that he was holding. It was probably for the best that... The woman rushed back outside, and he tensed up. Lord Hall," she called, leading a teenage boy by the hand out from the house. Presumably, he was the lady's son. But the petite woman looked pretty young. Honestly, he was awful at estimating ages, even before he lived in isolation for 5 years. You'd think that calling someone's daughter their wife was a mistake you'd only made once. "Are you looking for servants, my lord? My son is going to be looking for a job soon," she said, pushing the young man forward. "Hello, sir. My name is Senna Makoto." He hurriedly bowed, his voice squeaking. Please take me on as an apprentice. I'm good at cleaning, and I can run for hours. It'll make delivering messages to your men in this local guard really easy." The kid's voice hadn't even dropped yet. John glanced around, trying to make sure that nobody was sneaking up to ambush him. Nothing. There wasn't a soul in sight other than these two. Was this a trap? He subtly gave both of them a scan with Kiku detector, revealing nothing. They seemed clear, although there was still a non-zero chance the promise of wealth could have more conveniently compromised them. Sighing, he looked at the shabby house behind them. The paint was old and faded, and the door was hardly holding on as rot began to eat away at the edges with all the inexorable determination of a force of nature. No, this was just a mother trying her best for her son, even if the thought of effectively handing off her child to what might as well be a stranger unsettled him. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm on important business right now. Please ask me again later," he replied, not rejoicing in the way the boy winced. The situation wasn't something that he could deal with right now, anyway. The timer was running, and they only had so long before Kiku realized something was going on. "Of course, my lord. Excuse our intrusion," she replied, her eyes snapping momentarily to her son with a small lick of anger before putting him back inside with her. He hoped that wouldn't become a problem, whatever that was. If people started to try and thrust their children on me, he might end up running a bloody high school before long, once they figured out that he had a soft heart. Resuming his track, he carefully followed his detector, although he always ensured to scan for threats around him. Thankfully, the occasional person he passed mostly had better sense to engage him in conversation. A few started to walk in John's direction, but something in his countenance must have scared them off when he locked eyes with them. Where the hell was the ambush? Surely Kiku had a plan in place. She had to. When was she going to spring her trap? Maybe she had a contingency hidden by the Afuda rather than lurking around. Perhaps the second he saw it, whoever was waiting would see him too, and knowing that he wasn't near Yuki and take the action. His fingers twitched as his eyes darted around, frantically searching for threats. The signal grew stronger, though the slow trickle of people grew as he ventured deeper into the city's mercantile core, close to the market. With every passing person, the hairs on his arms stood up ramrod straight, as if he were a squirrel trying to puff itself up in the face of a cat. Movement caught the corner of his eye, and he snapped to the source, arm twitching as he readied himself to dodge an incoming attack. First, he pointed the crossbow to make them feel like it was more pressing threat, while he subtly angled the gauntlet in that direction. The movement stilled. The horrified man hurried back into his house and slid the door shut with an almighty crack. Sorry, John frantically apologized, his arm dropping back to his side before running away, jogging away from the house and letting the poor bastard get back to his day without an unhinged Unbound pointing a deadly weapon at him. He needed to get himself under control before he killed somebody. Was he truly so pathetic that he couldn't deal with some simple problems without Yuki at his side? He had lived without her for years. He could manage a few minutes. Clamping down on the ever-growing pit in his stomach, he pushed on, more cautious than ever as he followed the signal. Finally, he came across a small plaza. It seemed to be some sort of basic community square. There was some old, half-decayed seating at the edge, currently occupied by some old folks who hadn't yet noticed his arrival, evidently undeterred by the threat of the weather. Beyond that, the cobblestone square had one feature that immediately drew his eye, an old stone wall. And his food detector was going wild while pointed at it. Keeping the old folks in his peripheral vision after the cursory scan to make sure none of them were Kiku in disguise, John crept up to the wall, cautiously looking around for any hint of a threat. The only people he hadn't already accounted for were a couple who curiously watched him from the safety of their house, gossiping at the front door. But they didn't seem like a threat. There were no windows open to peek at him through. Nobody was lurking on the roofs. He tensed, peeling off the makeshift filter from the front of the magic detector and returning it to its original function. He ran the device over the nearby building, although there was some very, very weak positives that he could attribute to typical Afuda. There was nothing overly worrying that could indicate an ambush vector by magical forces. He had no choice but to press on. Casting one glance around the area, John crept up to the wall, leaning over to peek into its depths. The relatively high angle of the sun, he could barely see the water perhaps 30 feet below, a bucket hanging just above it, shrouded in shade. Still, there was no sign of an Afuda. Unfortunately, there seemed to be plant debris floating on the surface, making it hard to see into the depths. John couldn't imagine that it would be in a sealed container at the bottom. It'd be too easy to ding it with a bucket and potentially damage the seal, ruining the food once water got inside. Also, someone should probably clean all that debris out before it started to rot and poison everyone here. That wasn't the only possible hiding spot, though, was it? John pulled out his magic detector and ran a quick scan on the walls. Click! His eyes locked onto a particular piece of rock on the wall, one that looked maybe a bit loose. Swapping his telekinetic focus, he easily pried the rock free, with a few wiggles, popping it out to reveal... There! A fat-looking envelope of paper was attached to the inside of the crevice, almost like a letter hidden away in a secret panel of a desk. Smile finding its way onto his lips as he fished out the rock, John placed it to the side. But a sudden chill shot down his spine as he looked back into the pit. Something was wrong. Say, what was a piece of reed doing down there? Why wasn't it floating on its side? John's eyes widened at the faint glint of metal below the water, dodging out of the way as a flaming kunai soared from the water in a jet of stream, punching straight through the roof of the well before flying off into the sky like a misfired firework and screaming off into the distance like a demented projectile. A moment later, a man followed it, shattering the wood into a storm of splinters with contemptuous ease. John didn't even bother shielding himself and giving up visibility of the new threat as the man landed on the well's edge instead of relying on his warding to bounce the splinters, which it did admirably. He was tall, lean, and mean, wearing a deep blue shirt with torn sleeves, his corpse-pale arms terribly scarred, looking like he had been through a dozen too many bar fights. Resting heavily on his long, gangly limbs, he perched like a gargoyle on the lip. His long, soaking hair provided him a faux veil before he whipped it out on the way to reveal the borderline feral snarl, exacerbated by half of his upper lip being missing and exposing violent red gums. Somewhere in the background, all the people screamed as they frantically evacuated, and the couple slammed their door shut. Who the hell was this guy? How was he not affected by the Afuda? John looked him up and down, noting the lack of obvious yokai features aside from pointed nails, but those could be found on mundane locals. Were Unbound that didn't become more yokai-like, entirely immune to the effect. Hey, John said, voice a mask of false calmness, even as he tried to figure out how the hell to get enough time to get on his flying disc at his range. Someone's going to have to fix that, you know. The man laughed, though it was bitter, more forced out of something misguided politeness than anything. She didn't tell me that you had any wit, really. I was told that you were more a whining, simpering type. The man spat, voice full of gravel. Really now? Here I thought she had a crush on me. John responded, slowly, almost lazily raising his crossbow, as he bought time to think of a plan, even as panic threatened to flood his veins. But it didn't boil over. How long did she leave you waiting in that pit? A day? A week? I hope she lets you have a bathroom breaks. Cleaning wells out sucks. There was a constant building anxiety coiling around his heart like a serpent. But he remained calmer than he thought he should be. Honestly, he might have been less panicked than when he expected someone to jump out from around the corner at any moment. Perhaps he was getting too used to life and death situations. Watch it, pest. I just have to take you to her alive. You don't have to be entirely intact. Another kunai slipped from his sleeve, immediately igniting the second that it touched his hand. It was good information that the Unbound wasn't trying to kill him, even if he seemed like he wanted to. At the very least, the mystery man might pull these punches a bit. Maybe John could get on his disc if he got the man to look away. Sure, he could still try to hit him in the air, but his warding held up to getting chucked through the tree by some other Unbound. It should be able to handle a knife or two. From there, he should figure out a way to immobilize this bastard. The man seemed damn fast from that jump, and if John went to climb on his disc, he'd get tackled in a second. Now the real question, how did Kiku tell the man? Did he know that John wasn't an Unbound? Would he expect superhuman physicality? John huffed, shaking his head. It seems you have me at a disadvantage. They call me Whole John, he stated. You already know that, though. Who am I dueling today? Something. John didn't know how to describe it, and the man's stance shifted, and he rolled out the way just in time as a blur streaked past him. But he could feel something catch the bag with a loud clunk. Pivoting, John raised his weapon just in time to see the side of a building borderline fucking detonate in a shower of flame and fury, a chorus of screams and shouts erupting as the structure burst into flame, followed by John's now dislodged flying disc skidding to a stop in front of the inferno. Hear me, Whole John, the man screamed as he walked out from the wall of flames, appearing like an ashy aspiration. He was different now. Where he once pale, a scarred skin was thick, heavy layer of earthen armor worn like a plate mail. The only thing that he could see was the eyes, those damned yellow eyes. You killed my brother. The Kitsune will have her prize, but I will reap my toll first. Oh, shit. Again, the unmistakable feeling of danger struck John, and he ran out of the way just as the stone pillar erupted under where he was used to stand. Instinctively, he fired his corroded crossbow at the now armored juggernaut. What is this big scary the man began before the bolt impacted his chest. The emptiness aspect magic scattering the dense shell of order before a time delay core of gravity pulled it back together, coating the man in a thick shell of air that really didn't want to move. What? He took a heavy step forward, as if he was walking through a swamp. Frantically, John swapped his gauntlet focus to the cold focus, pointing it not at the man, but past him, unleashing a stream of sheer cold onto the inferno, smothering it before the fire got out of control, only forming a layer of frost upon the behemoth's set of armor. This won't stop me from breaking every bone in your body, the man growled, stomping towards John with enough force that the earth shook beneath his tread. Pure superhuman strength letting him brute force the slow, even though it looked like he was moving underwater. He only hoped Yuki was having an easier time of things. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.